Martin Loat, the founder and chairman of Propeller Group, and I'm hosting this panel over the next 45 minutes or so, where, as Ben said, we're going to discuss leadership life stories and how to craft a compelling narrative for your company, but I would also add for yourself or for the leaders that you represent if you're a PR and comms professional. And to help me explore this, I've got a stellar panel to join me. Jason Kingsley, OBE, is the co-founder of Rebellion, the British games developer success story. And how's this for a narrative? He's a practicing modern knight, an accomplished jouster and star of his own YouTube channel dealing with medieval horsemanship and chivalry. And it has 700,000 subscribers, so he's a channel in his own right. I'm not sure if our next guest, Tamara Littleton, rides a horse, but she does steer one of the most successful social media agencies around as CEO and founder of The Social Element, which this year celebrates 20 years in business. Tamara is co-host of the Genuine Humans podcast, and she's a prominent advocate of LGBT equality issues. Now, from two people who have founder in their job title to one whose company is actually called Founder, even if it is spelled FNDR. James Vincent ran Apple's agency TBWA Media Arts Lab and was a close confidant and advisor to Steve Jobs, no less, for a decade. 5 years ago, he launched Founder to help founders find their own compelling narratives. And he's advised tech giants such as Evan Spiegel, founder of Snap, and Brian Chesky, founder of Airbnb. Panel, welcome to this session. Now, can I start with Jason? Because I think a number of eyes would have been drawn to your wonderful bio picture with you astride your brilliant white charger there in your regalia and your get-up as a knight. How does that actually work as a leadership profile in business, or is it a kind of a sideline hobby, or do they work together? Tell us about that.
Well, a lot of the things I've done in business are not really deliberate or kind of prepared. I have a passion for horses, and I love riding, and I train them. I have 17 I look after myself. I train them in medieval riding. I try to rediscover medieval riding techniques, which includes riding in armor and simulating battles and things like that. Actually, I find it's quite a useful break from being a tech CEO and dealing with all the stresses and strains, communication struggles with making computer games for the whole world, games, books, now movies and TV and things like that. That's one area of my life. I actually find having something totally different actually helps me de-stress, and it certainly doesn't negatively impact on my my sort of public persona. Journalists love the idea that they can get some really interesting pictures. If they want to write an article about me for a newspaper about computer games, they can have me sitting there in front of a computer. Brilliant. But they can also, if they organize it properly, have me sitting astride a horse on a windswept landscape with a big banner in the background. And I also find it's really good to study other areas of expertise. In business, you can end up going down a rabbit hole of expertise, and I think having a occasional opportunity to look up and broaden your horizon makes you a better human being, quite frankly, and it is fun, and it changes. So it's sort of accidental, but my riding and my medieval stuff is very serious. It's not so much a hobby as a second job, really.
Leaders who don't have that kind of backstory, Jason, would you recommend trying to develop something to
I think you've got to be
there? Is it worth?
Yeah, I think you've got to be very authentic. I think people can smell a fake a mile off. So I think if you have an individual component of your personality that you want to develop, then by all means go ahead and develop it. I don't think it's rarely a negative. I suppose it depends what that quirk might be, but I think it actually helps to make you stand above a crowd of very talented other human beings. If people go, oh, it's that nutter that rides horses, he's also the CEO of a computer games company, they might not remember your name, but they might go, oh yeah, and then they can look me up and they can find out, and they can just see me talking about totally different subjects. So it's also nice to give back to the community as well, and a lot of my stuff is quite educational. So I'm sort of by accident educating a whole bunch of people in our cultural history.
Thank you for that. I get that, and I love the fact that if somebody says to you, "Oh, do we need a banner in it?" You're not thinking about some pop-up ad. You're actually thinking about a real banner. So that is distinctive. Tamara, talk to us a little bit about your leadership profile and how you've developed it, and to what extent it really helps the business, or is it more a personal thing for you?
Yeah, of course. And so I've been running the social element for 20 years now. And I think because we were quite niche at the beginning, I mean, there was a time where there was just 3 agencies doing social media. And in fact, I started when it wasn't even called social media. So it was kind of very niche, which meant that I put a lot of energy into the marketing of the agency and the focusing of the sort of the proposition. And, we help brands have a genuine human connection with their consumers online. So a lot of it was about what do we do and how do we do it and who do we work with? And then I kind of a little bit later in the day, I started focusing on, my own personal branding. And I still feel uncomfortable with the phrase personal branding, just because it feels a bit sort of odd, but it's been so important for the agency to sort of cut through and to raise the profile. And what Jason was saying was exactly right. It's like you get remembered a bit more if you do focus on that. So I think the journey that I went through was really focusing on what do I actually want to talk about. So, we get included in articles in the press talking about social media and about clients, etc. But there were certain areas. I actually started the company with a remote team right from the beginning. And so over the years, I spend a lot of time talking about culture and building a team when you have nearly 300 people working around the world, all working from home. So that became a bit of a specialist area. And then more and more, I was sort of talking about diversity and inclusion. And I didn't really again, I came to this a little bit late. I'm a out gay CEO, but I started talking about it more and more. I think I didn't really see the need to talk about it, but as it became then much more important to talk about it, one, for the community and for sort of make sure there are out role models out there. But again, it became a point of difference for me and the agency. And so I think, Martin, you and I were talking on your podcast that I rarely get asked to talk about TikTok these days. I'm very, very happy to talk about TikTok, but I tend to get sort of wheeled out to talk about, slightly different subjects. And I think that's really helped. But I would like to just sort of jump on one thing that I think you have to find your own style. And again, I think Jason was saying this, it's about not trying to copy anyone else. I was a bit aware of there were superstars like Gary Vee, who has a very sort of strong, persona. I'm not him. I'm very, very different. I have my own style. I'm much more introverted. And I think it's important that as you sort of going through, running a company, that you have to find a style and a persona that suits you and is authentic.
Thank you. Well, I'd love to bring James in here because, James, you're a founder yourself, obviously, but you're best known previously for being and currently for being an advisor to other famous founders. What's your take on this idea of finding your own voice and authenticity? Obviously, it's lovely to play lip service to that. Does it always happen, or do you find that some leaders just have to turn on something for the cameras when they're on show?
So yeah, our company's founded FNDR, but we couldn't afford the vowels, so we just became FNDR. But we just work with founders, and I had the privilege to work with Steve very, very closely for 11 years, every day, Wednesday from 1 till 3. I had 2 hours of his time, and every minute had to be productive. Steve being an example of someone whose leadership profile was entirely around his ability to innovate and drive and cause change that has, created social media, has created pretty much absolutely everything that is the modern world. Gaming, not created, but you understand what I mean. Radically changed the way that people live and operate. So, he was an example of rather an enigmatic character, and there's never been a good book about him, so don't read any of them or read all of them, but whatever you want. But at some point there will be the correct profile about him. What would I say? Look, I think every founder, and maybe I'll talk a little bit about how we work. A lot of our founders talk about narrative therapy, which is a little bit of how we work. So you hire us for sort of a 3-month sprint. We work very, very closely with the founder. We don't work with companies unless we're working with the founder, hence the reason why we're called founders. So CMOs are welcome, but we work with founders. And we start with them. Like, who are you? What are you about? What's your existence? What are you trying to do? You know, like, oh, I'm horses and games. And I get horses and games. I see the connection. Like, it's, you know, it's the same thing, isn't it? Anyway, so I would, you know, I've already got a sense of Jason or a sense of Tamara just from some of the answers they gave. We intentionally start there in the process of getting to know people and asking those questions. And then we go from sort of the personal narrative to the company narrative and try to see what the thread is there, see where that comes from with them. And so we're really listening to that. And then we start throwing a lot of ideas and provocations at them around those topics to pull out whether or not what's authentic about those connections, right? To the point that Jason and Tamara both made, like, don't be making some shit up because, you know, social, right? I mean, everything is open and it's the opacity of the past is gone. Like, don't be pretending to be something that you're not. But actually, if you are something, you can really, you know, really push into it, and it can become all kinds of podcasts or YouTube channels or whatever it is that you enjoy doing. And so I think I'm always looking at pulling the genuine character of the individual out. And so, you know, I just get very close with my founders. So I got very close with Evan Spiegel and have some, you know, and Brian Chesky around 2018, 17, 18, when they really, Airbnb became who they were. And of course, with Steve, that was a whole other thing. And now we work with just a whole bunch of startup founders, advising them about how to become the next round of that. But our starting point is, who are you? What are you about? Tell me your origin story. How are you different? What kind of company are you trying to build? Okay, great. Let's build from that. And so we're not lipstick on the pig. We're trying to actually pull it out of you and then elevate it and find words to describe it that maybe you haven't got yourself. So.
Okay. And just to stretch a little bit, I know you work with founders, but what would be your observation as a senior advisor if you're working with a non-founder chief exec, you know, like a FTSE 100 or a stock market listed career CEO? They're not the founder, but they've got to have a big persona. And, you know, of this side of the Atlantic, we've seen it come unstuck recently with the P&O Ferries situation. Right. So there's numerous examples. What would be your take on whether that kind of CEO has the luxury of that kind of persona leadership style?
Yeah, look, I would say in general, we're not good with multi-stakeholder environments just as a company. Like, I don't want to talk to a committee. I don't want to go like, what does Fred and Bill and Ed and what does, you know, like 7 people think of the idea? Like, we're much, much better at like 1. That doesn't, or 2 or 3, but that doesn't preclude us. We call them refounders, Martin. I think that's probably the clearest way of saying it. And so my question to them would be, do you have license to, if this company has gone astray and you're trying to put it back on a track, and you're trying to refound, we will go through the exercise as if you're a startup to refound this company. Like P&O Ferries, you're totally off track, blah, blah, blah. What were you originally? I used to take P&O Ferries over to Belfast because my grandparents lived there. I know P&O Ferries. Like, I used to think they were freaking awesome, right? Where do you go back to it? The people that work there were always cool. Like, I don't know, like, there's a way to get back to some of the places that you don't have to go backwards. But so anyway, my simple answer would be, I'm looking for refounders in those situations. So I'd have a conversation and say, are you able to refound this company? Are you capable, like not just capable, but have you been given license to refound? Or are you just sitting there on top of a big company that is already a Titanic and heading that way, and you're just trying to make it look better? Because we're not very good in those situations, because, I want to deal with someone that can then action something. So. Okay.
I appreciate the distinction. Obviously, plenty of people on this call will be dealing with multi-stakeholders. So any tips around that are always useful, although I take the point, positioning someone as a refounder may be a good way of getting the classic CEO back on that track. But
Yeah.
coming back to Jason, I would love to talk a little bit about the kind of media channels for getting your message out there, because you talked a bit earlier on about your medieval knight persona and interest being a great photo opportunity, which it is. But of course, you've also got the modern history YouTube channel with nearly 700,000 subscribers. So in terms of getting your message out there, is it easier for you to use your owned media or to get involved in other people's media channels?
Well, I obviously do quite a lot of all sorts of different media. You know, social media is really important for us, retweeting other people, following other people, commenting politely on other people's media streams is always useful. What I find, though, is that there's a very big disconnect between what we might think of as traditional media and new sort of online media. Certainly in my personal experience. So one example is I was covered by a major national newspaper in the UK, got a 2-page sort of analysis and, you know, conversation about me. It was the Times, Sunday Times. And it was really interesting, and a lot of people read it, but it had zero effect on any of the analytics and data flow that I had got from my social media, which I thought was interesting. So I get the feeling you're talking to very different audiences, in fact, which I think is important to remember, that not everybody consumes media in the same way. There are lots of different forms of it, and some of them age. You know, some of them have got a window of an audience, and that audience is actually aging, but they're not losing or gaining. They're just kind of getting older. Like, for example, the BBC audience, still a big audience, but it's a greying audience, and that's a challenge for the BBC and the content. How do they get to a younger audience? I think probably it's very, very difficult. So I would say, don't assume that getting good coverage in one form of media equates to any kind of coverage in another form of media. They're very different. It's also very interesting how immediate you can be on social media. So I talk direct to my fans in social media without any intermediary kind of slightly skewing what I've said in an interview. So I'm quite keen on live interviews with journalists, because it's much harder. I mean, it's much harder for them to fit what you say into an agenda. They can obviously ambush you with the difficult questions, and that's something I'm always aware of. The easy questions come first. As you get towards the end of the time allotted, there's often the opportunity for people to throw in more difficult questions, or questions that are harder to field. So just be very aware that that's a perfectly legitimate technique. But I mean, that's what journalists are supposed to do. They're supposed to ask you awkward questions and get good answers from them. That's literally their job, or should be. So I would say media is quite a broad topic, really, and they're not necessarily overlapping in any way that you might suspect.
No, interesting perspective. I will come to Tamara again in a minute, but as you made that point about fielding difficult questions, I did want to quickly zip across to James, because we were talking earlier and you were telling me a real live example of one of your clients getting ready for difficult questions and how you basically turn that to advantage. So I wouldn't mind if you could just tell the audience about that, because it seemed like a really good practical tip of managing a leader's profile. Evan Spiegel, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, why don't I just take a minute out and tell you that little story. So, sorry, there's sirens in the background because I'm in New York. I'm not inventing that just so that I look cool. But anyway, so back in 2016, when we were working, actually, Tamara, you'll know all about this, but Snapchat was sort of, you know, social media doesn't always have the best reputation. And Snapchat was sort of lumped in with all the other sort of bad guys, like, oh, bad things happen on social media and people, you know. And so Facebook, you know, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, it's just all a bunch of waste of time and people posting and whatever, right? And so Evan and I went for a walk on the beach, because that's how he likes to work, which is just a leadership thing. I think everybody has read that somewhere, that you're supposed to walk and then you get really smart. So we walked on the beach, and I said to him an idea, because we were talking about working together. I said, lying to strangers, truth to friends. And I said, most social media is lying to strangers. Let's be honest. You don't have 15,000 friends. they're strangers, and you just posted a picture of the one nice thing that you did today, but you had the shittiest day of the week, right? Or you sent a picture of your happy, smiley family, and actually you're kind of not happy, and who knows what's going to happen. Anyway, so is it true? Are they people actually, right? So they're lying to strangers, right? And I like a little drama, so it's a little strong, but whatever. And I said, but Evan, with Snapchat, look, you're not solving, world hunger or anything, but you are truth to friends. On Snapchat, you have 15 friends and you're really truthful. It's really truthful. I mean, like too much. I have 2 teenage kids, and the pictures they post are like, none of us would ever think of as even being a picture, but whatever. That's unbelievably blunt and straightforward and just messy and whatever, right? So anyway, so the whole intention strategically was for us to, I said to Evan at the beginning, we need to get you out of the department of lying to strangers and put you in the department of truth to friends, right? So we started doing a whole bunch of things, and we worked together for 2 years. We did a campaign called Real Friends, which came out and sort of clarify. We had these big quotes by Melania Dietrich said, best friends are the people you call at 4 a.m. and they pick up, and they're like what are friends? Real friends, like not pretend friends that like you have 15,000 of on other social media. So we started defining that. We're putting comms out. We don't know. Anyway, the story, and I'm sorry, the preamble is longer than the story, but the story was Evan was about to speak at Recode, right? And this was 2018, maybe. Recode's, a big conference in California. I'm sure there's reverberations here too. I think Kara Swisher was interviewing, and a friend of mine. Anyway, I got word that Evan was coming on just before Sheryl Sandberg, of course, right? So Snapchat and then Facebook, right? And so I send Evan sort of the 10 points I think you should make to the, at the speech. And I said, I sent you these 10 points. He said, okay, great. Thanks, James. That's useful. I'm like, but I know you won't make any of them, because he always ignored, most of the things I advised him to do. So I said, but you need to snap me right now. So he snapped me and called me up, and I said, look, one thing, and you must please, just if there's only one thing you do tomorrow, you're going to get a question. And here's the question. How do you feel, Evan, about the fact that Facebook, Instagram, stole your IP and called it Instagram Stories, right? How do you feel about that, right? Because Instagram Stories is Snapchat, guys. I don't know anybody, right? And Tamara will know, but, right? Snapchat, chronological storytelling. Instagram Stories, which is what most people do on Instagram, is Snapchat, right? They basically just took it and put it there and called it Instagram Stories, right? So they're asking the creator of it, because he's the product guy, Evan, and so they're going to ask him, how do you feel about that, Evan? And I know what you're going to say. You can say, it's fine, good for them, we'll come up with something else. Good luck to them. They got 800 million new users, and Snapchat was stuck at 200 million. So this is existential crisis. They stole your IP, right? Anyway, so you're going to say, it doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. Fine. And I said, please don't say that. I got one request. They're going to say, how do you feel about them stealing your IP? And all I'd like you to say is, I wish they'd steal my policy on privacy. That was the headline the next day. Evan Spiegel says, I wish Facebook would steal their policy on privacy. What is their policy? Everybody went to look at what their policy was, which actually turned out to be far better. They expunge all the data every 6 months. They don't sell it to, Russian hackers or whatever, Cambridge Analytica, all that nonsense. They don't force you to stay on there by, handing you off to QAnon and trying to see if they can't be more controversial to keep you on the platform. All the nasty things that Facebook does, or whatever the new name is that I refuse to use. Anyway, so, right. So with that moment, he was able to do the strategic thing that we decided to do, which we did through a communication campaign. But that was a big headline, and everybody read it. And then everybody went off and said, let's go have a look at Snapchat and see, why are they different? Oh, they're different because they're small, because it's real, because they have a privacy policy. And so that was just a very quick shift in narrative and taking opportunity of a question and turning it around to your advantage. So
it's a great example, and I'm hoping that the comms professionals listening on the Comms Club will note that when you have a client who might say, well, I'm going to just say this, have a think about how it could be turned around and how you can steal the headline with a comment like that. So Tamara, switching to a different kind of stakeholder group, switching away from talking to the media and the press and so on. You run an agency, you've obviously got a strong and growing client constituency, yet you're very strong in your views on various issues. Do you ever have examples where you clash with your client base, or are they kind of self-selecting? Because there must be some times where there's a bit of a friction between some of the values you uphold in dealing with the crisis and maybe the commercial interests or the share price of the company.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think because there's sort of two jobs that I have. So I'm co-founder of Polpeo, the crisis simulation platform, and running the social element. But a lot of the time we are focused on crisis and reputation and avoiding getting people into trouble. I would say that it's been quite straightforward for me, though, from a values match, because we don't work with anyone that we don't want to work with, and we're very clear about that. And we've turned down loads of clients, and we have been known to let clients go as well, as if there is not a values match, or if there's just, you know, the relationship is not what we want it to be. And I think that's one of the advantages of being independent, running your own thing, is you can actually just make very decisive, you can just make decisions that protect your team. I think what's been really interesting is that the more vocal I've been, the more opinionated I've been on social media, in podcasts, running my own podcast. I think it attracts more of a values match. So it's less about there being issues, and it's more about that, clients will get in touch to say congratulations when we've won awards and that kind of thing. And that's fantastic. Obviously, that's wonderful. But I'm much more motivated when a client gets in touch to say, I really appreciated that podcast you did and what you said, and it really connected with my values. Or for example, just going back to being out in the LGBT community, lots of younger people coming into the industry, getting in touch to say that they really appreciate that I am so vocal, because they haven't been able to be out in the industry. And I think that's something that people forget, that I think there was a study by Vodafone that 46% of people go back in the closet when they start their first job, and our industry is just not perfect. And so I think it's so encouraging when you get that values match of people recognizing that, you have a voice and people respect you for that. So yeah, it's not really been an issue.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So we've got about 15 minutes left. I just want to switch the questioning a little bit, because with the Comms Club here, which we've launched a Propeller Group, the key stakeholder and constituency is the professional PR person, the professional comms person. You're all leaders and founders with very strong personas, as we've already unpacked. But I'd love to know to what extent you need or rely, or any tips you have for people who are your spokespeople or your representatives. Perhaps starting with you, Jason, do you do all your own thing, or do you have people handling the outreach, fielding calls for you, making decisions on your behalf? And how do you entrust them to do that?
I try to empower the people around me and communicate as much as I possibly can. Obviously, we've got marketing departments, we've got PR people. Broadly speaking, they're working on projects though. They'll be working on a particular component of the company. They might be working on promotion for the latest graphic novel, or promotion for the latest Sniper Elite game. We've got one coming out now, so they're fully busy on releasing that. But I get involved at an early stage, and rather than swooping in and changing everything, I try to be involved a little bit all the way along, just so that nothing's a surprise to me. That if something's not quite right, I can nudge it, or we can have a conversation about why I think it's wrong, and they can give me feedback and say, well, actually, I think you're wrong. We need it to be like this. And if that's plausible, if the data shows that, I'll go with their recommendation. They're experts after all. I mean, one of the things that riding horses has taught me, that it's actually a conversation. It's a two-way exchange. And I think leadership is very much about an exchange of data. You have to make decisions sometimes, but they shouldn't be arbitrary and random. They should be based on kind of consideration and conclusions and feedback. And sometimes you have to make a decision. You have to use the wisdom of Solomon to decide between two people's advice. That's what leadership is. Leadership is not being an autocrat and just telling everybody exactly what they've got to do every moment of the day. That way lies madness. So I would say encourage conversations early and often about any message that you're communicating.
Right, but I'm also fascinated by going back to the medieval references. It's a very modern democratic account you're giving there. I don't know whether some of the knights that on their chargers would have been quite so inclusive with
I actually think no, I don't think they'd be inclusive. I think the whole concept of society was very different. Broadly speaking, there were three categories. There were those that fought and died, the knights. There were those that prayed for everybody's souls, the religious people, and there were those that worked, which was probably 95% of everybody, who were largely, we call them peasants, but they were subsistence farmers or subsistence plus farmers who were growing the food for everybody. So there was a demarcation of what you were expected to do. But I still think they all, when they were using leadership skills, they needed to use those soft communication skills even back then. If you want people to fight for you or grow your food, there does come a point where, you might have to sort of instruct them what you need to do. But at the same time, they can run away to the town and get their freedom, or they can just not fight very well for you. So I think whatever Hollywood tells us, whatever TV shows tell us, I actually think there has always been a two-way communication between leaders and the rest of the team. And I think that's hugely important.
Then keeping with the theme of that question, Tamara, and I know a little bit about the answer because I'm delighted to say that Propeller is the PR agency for the social element. But what's your prescription and tips for how to get the best out of the communications people working for you?
Well, I think the first thing is that it's not about me. We've just talked about a lot of it, being the sort of pushing the founder, etc. But it's so important to get key people in your company with their own profile, their own opinions, and you want lots of voices in the agency. I think I have a good relationship with the people on my team at Propeller who are able to sort of come up with ideas of how I can be inserted into the story. So it's a very proactive approach to getting our name out there. And also, I think it's just a collaboration with the team. So we have a great team writing sort of content internally that's more sort of around what's going on in social media and the industry. That links up to our PR plan. And then it's trying to get me out and about and, speaking or opinions, etc. So it takes a village, I would say, but it's all about the relationship between us and Propeller, who are fabulous, I would say, Martin. But it's also about just constant. It's like drip feed. So I spend so much time. So as well as the sort of the PR and trying to sort of get our name out there and media relations, etc. My iPhone is constantly telling me that I do about sort of 6 hours on my phone above and beyond my laptop. And that's because I'm actually just on LinkedIn every day and Twitter. And I think, obviously I'm going to say this because I run a social media agency, but social media is absolutely critical to getting, your profile raised and leading to relationships with potential clients as well.
Well, thank you for that plug. Your crypto is in the post. So, James, you must have worked with a lot of PR people. Let's get a little bit down to the nitty gritty. When you say to Steve Jobs or Evan Spiegel or Brian Chesky, do this, and some senior comms person whose actually job is to relate to the media, to TV and so on, says, well, hang on, I've got my own persona and I think the boss should do this. Do you get a clash? Who wins? How does that play out?
No, good question. I mean, typically, no, not a clash at all. I mean, it tends to be that I've established a relationship with the founder that is multi-layered, and sometimes there'll be a question that's very comms related that Steve will, like, for example, I'll give you another little story if you don't mind. It's actually, I don't know whether you remember back, there was an iPhone that came out that if you put your fingers in the wrong place, it didn't work. It was called Antenna Gate because the antenna was all the way around the edge. But if you put your fingers in a certain place, it basically stopped the antenna working, right? Which is probably one of the single, flaws in Apple product development in the 40 years they've been making products. But anyway, they put it out, and for whatever reason, it got out. And Steve's it was kind of a mad situation. I was on holiday in France. It was a big crisis. Suddenly, blah, blah, blah. Steve's like, get back here. We need everybody around the table, right? And I'm like, no, I'm on holiday. It's like, no, get back here. Like, anyway, so I come back. So I walk into a room, and it's full of comms people. And he's got, like, some of the greatest comms people. And, great advice all around the table. Steve starts with this is ridiculous. They're not holding it right. Blah, 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 right? Right? Which is ridiculous. Anyway, so we went around the table, and sometimes comms people, had incredibly smart insights as to sort of how to do an event and how to think about, like, repositioning and thinking about right? And I was just purely about narrative. And so, and I think I was last, and they were like, all right, James, what do you think? And there's always a roll of the eyes. They're like, okay, James, what do you think? And I was like, Steve, and I know that you can't say you're not holding it right. Right? I mean, we just all know that. Like, so let's just not do that. And I said, honestly, we're like a big company now. We were whatever. Well, they weren't even $1 trillion. Now they're $3 trillion. But anyway, back then they were still big. But they were on, like, the 4th iPhone or the 5th iPhone. I can't remember exactly. But anyway, I said, I feel like this moment actually could be a good moment. And so, like, as Obama said, don't let a good crisis go to waste, right? Which in 2008, 2009, like, right, you don't let a good crisis go to waste. That was when all these big companies were created, Airbnb, Uber, right? They're all created in the middle of a crisis. Anyway, don't let a good crisis go to waste. So here we are. We've got a phone out that doesn't work. People don't hold it. It doesn't work. Okay. But here's the most perfect product company the world's ever seen that's never put out a dud. And I was just like, I don't know. Honestly, I feel like emotionally, culturally, we should say, and Steve, you should say, we're not perfect. And there was silence in the room, and everyone's like, oh my God, what the fuck? Like, what? Really? You're going to, what? Anyway, so, and we went through a whole series of conversations. It's like, that's ridiculous, James. What a stupid idea, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, cut to the event. He comes on stage. At the back, he says, look, you know what? We try to be the most preeminent technology company that unites humanity and technology and But guess what? Click, we're not perfect. And we're not perfect. It doesn't mean we don't try hard. Let me tell you about all our antenna technology. Let me tell you about everything we're doing. Let me tell you about why we're better than everyone else. In fact, let me tell you that if you bought this phone and you don't want it, we'll give you full refund. If you want a free cover, you get a free cover. If you want to, upgrade, downgrade, do whatever you want. But the overarching opportunity there was for them to have some humility at a moment that I felt they needed a little humility. And so we're not perfect came out as an answer. And it was, I think,
James, I might have to wrap that one up, James, because we've only got a few seconds left. Sorry. And we've had a question from the audience. So I really want to get that in, but this lesson of turning around the founder, what they might have said into something more positive is really coming across loud and clear. So thanks for bringing that. We've got a question from the audience for Jason, actually. Question from Jeremy Thorpe is his name. How do you manage communicating to audiences and consumers who've grown up with your product and feel some ownership of it? And he's asking,
that's
2000 AD dread fan?
That's always a tricky one, especially when people started reading when they were children and now are continuing to read as adults, and they've got the sort of golden glow of what it was to be young with a product that they're still living with. So one always has to be a little careful. And what we try to do is keep a balance between kind of pleasing the hardcore fans who've been with us for a long time, but also being aware we need to get a new audience in for our content. So what we've done recently, we'd have what we call we have jumping on points for 2000 AD, which is a weekly comic, but we also have the all ages edition, which is an edition that's available for people to read to their kids as well. I mean, one of the weird phenomena, it's not weird, it's an interesting, exciting phenomena we have, is that we have dads and mums who read 2000 AD as a child, who now have their own children, who are now introducing it to their children. And that creates a really interesting dialogue between the ages and what science fiction means. And even the name of the title, 2000 AD, is kind of in the past now. So I think what you also have to do is be true to the product as well, that people are very opinionated and the internet gives us the opportunity to hear people's opinions, but you don't necessarily have to agree with them. But I think what you have to do is try and engage with them. And you might say, great idea, but we're not going to do that because of this. The worst possible situation to do is to elicit feedback from people and say you're listening, and then ignore them and don't do anything about their feedback. You actually can turn big fans into big enemies very, very quickly. I think even if you listen to people's feedback and you give them, you say, well, that isn't going to work for us, but thank you very much, then you might not make them love you because you haven't done their idea, but you haven't turned them into an enemy. You've at least done the human thing and listened and responded.
No, that's really good advice, and some advice that some people don't take, because sometimes it is easy to ignore. And I think some people listening might be concerned that if they do engage, you almost give a signal to come back with a counter comment, and you can end up going down a bit of a rabbit hole.
Yeah, you do have to be a bit. Yeah, you have to be a bit careful about that. You have to be careful sometimes engaging with people who, could be toxic. We've all encountered people who are have personalities that can be negative. So it happens very, very rarely, but it does happen in fandom a tiny amount. And you just have to evolve strategies to try to de-escalate those situations.
I have one last quick thing, if I can, and it'll be 30 seconds.
You've got to bring it. Yeah, go for it.
Just really quickly, I mean, we also just hired Propeller, so thank you very much. And you guys seem awesome, so I'll take Tamara's word for it. But also, we had our first meeting last week. And one of the things, I have 3 amazing partners, right? But I'm the person that everybody knows because of the stories I tell and blah, blah, blah. But they're all amazing, but they just don't have profiles. And so part of this is creating a partnership and raising the profile of them. So it's not just like the James show, and so, I have a great partner, Becca, who's now on 2 or 3 female founder platforms because she's worked with like 20 female founders. I have a great storyteller who's going to go do creative platforms and a great strategist that's going to go talk at Cannes and blah, blah, blah. So I think one of the things is definitely, you can tell from my personality, like I'm used to being the boss, but actually the company is way stronger if everybody has their own profile. We're 4 times as strong, and I think Propeller will help us do that. And so looking forward to that very much.
It's a lot more sustainable for the company as well, that if it's not just about founder, it has to be about giving more of a legacy, but also getting everyone else to have that voice too.
Yeah, no, good lessons to end on, spreading the leadership persona among the group. I'm going to wrap it up there because I'm getting all sorts of messages flickering in my message box here. So I want to wrap up this panel on finding your leadership profile and narrative, and say thanks very much to Jason Kingsley, Tamara Littleton, and James Vincent.